Shields, Sabrina Sutherland. This is my one. Everyone else, sit where you like. Debbie Rizzo, Sean Bolger, Michael Horse, and Jake Walton. This is absolutely incredible. More stars than there are in heaven. As always, everyone in the audience, if you can be thinking about questions that you might want to ask at the end, we'll open it up. So, just keep that in mind. So at the very first Twin Peaks Festival, back in 2010, we started the Q&A with Catherine Coulson, Julie Cruz and Charlotte Stewart by asking how they got involved with Twin Peaks, how they got the call. And this year, Twin Peaks is back, everything feels so fresh, it feels like we're starting all over again, so I'd like to ask the same question, but for the return. Maybe I could start with Sherilyn and James and Michael, the original cast members. I mean, how did you first hear that Twin Peaks was coming back, and what was your reaction? Whoa!
Hello? Hello. My first reaction was just this weird sort of feeling like it felt like it was meant to be, but yet at the same time it was completely a huge surprise, and just complete elation, like literally like a dream coming true, and something almost like subconscious feeling inside, like this is supposed to happen, but it's like sort of like impossible that it's happening at the same time. It's just a really cool, miraculous sort of feeling.
Michael, could you answer that?
Estoy kochi PG Walker Kaptan. Sorry, just messing with you. Somebody said they're going to do a reboot of this. Are you going to be in it? I went, nobody called me. And I got a call from David. It's like talking to somebody out of a 50s sitcom. He goes, hey, buddy, we're getting a gang back together. And I said, you got something for me? He said, yeah. I just wanted a cameo. It wasn't about the money. I just wanted to be involved. And it was... I never thought it would come back. I thought it had died before its time, like James Dean, and maybe that was part of its allure. But to revisit the amazing world of Twin Peaks one more time it was like no time had passed at all. I thought, I wonder how everybody's going to be, and Kyle's a big star. Everybody was so nice, and how you been, and it was just a joy.
Well, I wanted more than a cameo. And I was verbal about it. I'm like, I want to be in every episode. And it was funny, I was with Cheryl Lee when we were talking to him, and she went to the bathroom, and then she came back, and David's like, Sherilyn Fenn says she wants to be in every episode. And Cheryl's like, well, she should be. My loyal friend. Anyway, we all found out, or I think I heard through the press, or people were texting me, and then I just emailed David and said, I'm not going to believe it until I hear this from you. And, he said, we're doing it, we're all doing it. And I, screamed in a restaurant. It was embarrassing. And I ran out, and, just childlike ideas that I'll do Twin Peaks and live happily ever after. Seriously. So I'm really happy to have been able to revisit, and all of you are so amazing. Say good family.
So the same question then to the three new cast members, Amy and Jake and Sean. How did you come to be involved in Twin Peaks: The Return?
Well, I heard about it, I should go back a bit. The casting director had seen me in a screen test I did for a movie about 10 years ago. And she'd been given the screen test to have a look at because the director thought she would like what I was doing and the work that she did. And she asked to meet with me in London and said, I work with these people and I think that it would be a good fit for you. So if you ever come to America, please look me up. So I went to America and I looked her up.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, about 7 years ago, I made a video on YouTube doing all different accents. It went viral. David Lynch saw it, he really loved it, and he got Sabrina to get in touch with me, set up a Skype call, and he said he wanted me in one of his projects, and we were just Skyping back and forth for a couple of years, and then it was 2014, I think, and he had a Skype with him, and he said, "Have you ever seen Twin Peaks before?" And at that point I hadn't. I said I'd heard of it, I'd not seen it. A little bit before my time. I was born on the year that the Fire Walk With Me came out, in 1992. So I missed it the first time around. But anyway, so he said, but his reaction was brilliant. It was like, I said, "Oh no, I haven't seen it." He's like, "Oh, it doesn't matter. We're making a new one." We're making a new one, and you're going to be in it. And we just went from there. So obviously, when he told me I was going to be in it, I went on Amazon, I bought the box set, and I got up to speed. Fire Walk With Me as well, on Blu-ray, and I just watched the whole lot, really got into it, loved it, and then in 2016, I finally went out there. March 2016, went out there, filmed my scenes, had the best time of my life, and it was incredible, amazing.
I moved to LA about 4.5 years ago, and the first thing I did when I moved out there was a short play where I was an aging Vegas lounge singer, and my hooker happened to be one Kimmy Robertson. Just love at first sight. And Kimmy and I just became really good friends over the course of the run of that show, and I don't know, when you go to LA, when you meet certain people that you connect with, you have to make an effort to make relationships stick because everything's moving really fast. And Kimmy sort of took me under her wing and showed me the ropes. And she brought my stuff into Joanna, and that's how I ended up in the show.
Cool. Debbie Zoller, if you don't know, was the head of the makeup department on Twin Peaks: The Return. Her CV is, look it up on the IMDb. It's quite something. So you'd worked on Mad Men and Indiana Jones and The Hunger Games, and what made you want to work on a show like Twin Peaks? What was the kind of the allure of
Well, I've worked with David for 21 years
Right.
going on. I started with him and Sabrina on Lost Highway. And that was my first introduction to the world of David Lynch. And I was ruined after that for any other director. And I just said to him, I can't work for anybody else, I just have to work for you. And because he's such an artist and has such an amazing way of communicating with his actors as artists and other artists, and it's just amazing how welcoming he is and how he makes you feel so safe, yet you're doing these things, especially like on Twin Peaks. We got no testing, we weren't allowed to do any pre-tests, so everything was just kind of right there, done at that time. And we did? Yeah. Oh, we did. We had one test. That's right. One test. Yeah. So it's just a trust that you have, that he has with you, and he has with all of his actors, and the same with me. And it's been a tremendous blessing, really. So, and to be here, to see all of you guys dressed up, and feeling this love for all of these characters, it's quite something for me to witness. So, thank you.
So, obviously, in this year of the return, the Q&A is going to focus to a large extent on the return, but I think there's room, we have time to go back and talk a little about the original series as well before we move on to the return. Michael, as someone who hasn't been to the festival before, I think we'd be really interested to hear some of your memories of shooting Twin Peaks. When you were shooting the pilot, did you have any conception of what it was going to turn into, that it was going to turn into this huge thing?
Yeah, I did. I knew we were doing something special. I think most of us did from get-go.
Right.
You know, when you work with David, it's, you know, to be a part of his artistic palette is a great honor, you know. But we knew from the very beginning we were changing the face of television. But it took me all this time to really realize the impact of it. Everything that's out there now, it's American Gods and Taboo and Legion, all has Twin Peaks' DNA all over it. It changed the way that people process television.
Yeah. I was thinking about absolute favourite Hawk moments that I wanted to ask you about. And the one that I always keep coming back to is Diane Shapiro, PhD Brandeis, One Woman Can Make You Fly Like an Eagle. I would imagine that, I'd say at least 90% of the people in this room could recite that poem verbatim.
I don't remember it. I don't remember.
Do you remember shooting the scene? What was the...
Yeah, but I don't remember the poem.
No.
The fans, they'll go, when you said this, I go, I don't remember it. But what Twin Peaks did, as far as the image of Native Americans in film, it held some mirrors up to some stereotypes and it did away with others. The Hawk was a really intuitive character. It was one of the first times you got to see a Native person in a contemporary role that had, you know, that had families, had love, went to college.
Yeah.
You know, it was...
And he was also one of the few characters who actually does any detecting.
Yeah.
in return as well.
The Hawk knew what was going on, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, the Twin Peaks is really rooted in Native culture. You know, we understand that there are many different dimensions in the system of life, and that all things that are alive, you know, for years, you know, Native science, we said, you know, we're all related. And people, yeah, well, I'm 2 chromosomes away from the snail darter, you know. We said that, you know, that everything is alive, and people, yeah, the rocks are alive. We knew the existence of the atoms and of molecules, you know. And I'm the most un-New Age guy where I live, you know, but up in those woods, those mountains and those trees, they have an entity to them. There is a spirit up there, you know?
Yeah, thank you. James, turning to you again, I was thinking about scenes that I loved with you and scenes that really stuck in my head. And another one that I kept going back to was your scene in the woods with Donna in the pilot, where you're lit entirely by the bike headlamp. Can you? I mean, it's such an intense scene. Can you recall shooting that scene?
Yeah. It's like, basically, it's like we called it Hamburger Hill, but it was like, I thought the whole thing felt like a dream, basically, and then that's the like quote, you know, but it really did, because well, for me, I was 22 years old, and I was walking up like this path with all these people and all these actors and David and everything, and we were walking up into these woods for a really long time. Then we come upon a motorcycle, and he says, okay, guys, get ready. You know, it's just really neat. You're in the middle of these woods, walking with these people, and there's this bike, you know. And David is like, okay, Laura, sit there, James, sit there. And then from then on, for about 14 hours, that was it. And it rained, and that's why we called it Hamburger Hill, because they brought hamburgers up, because the crew, when it rained, the bike and the crew all started sliding. And they brought the hamburgers up because everybody's complaining and everything, and they were soggy, really bad soggy. Yeah, so that was it. And basically, I think we went over that scene. It was like, I think they actually cut the scene down a little bit, and we went over that scene about, I don't know, 14 hours worth of takes, basically, just over and over and over and over. So that whole thing, it was just, and it was so beautifully written. It was one of the most beautifully written things I've ever read. And it was that was almost daunting, because it was like, I hope I can get near what this is, you know what I mean? Just reading it, I mean, when something's written that beautifully, it just does it to you, and it acts for you, you know what I mean? So it would only be you that could mess it up. So, yeah. But yeah, it was like one of the most beautiful experiences I ever had, and it was the whole thing up there at the pilot. It was like very dreamlike.
Yeah. Can you talk about how it felt, I mean, as a young actor, when Twin Peaks landed as massive as it did, when it hit as big as it did? I mean, what was it like to, start being recognized and be on magazine covers? I mean, what was that like for you as a young guy?
I didn't. I basically, and it was cool that way, sort of, because eventually sort of a trickle of that came in or whatever, but my consciousness really wasn't about sort of like, I don't think I was really driven to really like, I want to be a man, I want to be, you know what I mean? Yeah. I thought it was so trippy and beautiful that I got to work with David and stuff, because, I mean, I was talking to somebody earlier, I grew up on Eraserhead, and yeah, I was about 11, I was telling Sabrina, when they did the Elephant Man tour, I was about 11 years old, and I went to the theater with my dad, and that movie rocked me so hard for about a month and a half every day. Yeah. I almost cried every day because it hurt so bad. Yeah. I was just like, oh, that guy, why, And all I could picture, and the way David did now I know how he works and stuff, the way he did those noises and stuff, and everything's in black and white, and when that guy opened up his cage, clank, 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 and get over it, and he's like, it was just like, and then I got to meet the guy, so when I met him, I was just like, and then Eraserhead, I used to sit at like, I don't know, 13, 14 years old and just sit in front of the TV and rewind it, watch it again, back in the days of rewind, just rewind it and watch it again, and yeah, it was high comedy to me. I mean, it was like really, so so to go meet him and everything was really like, it was just very neat, like most people say, it's like, you don't expect it, you're going to expect him to be like that, so, but.
Yeah. Sherilyn, again, I was thinking about scenes of yours that I loved, and I imagine that you have discussed tying a cherry stem a million times, so I want to discuss a different scene, and one that stuck out for me when I was rewatching the series and that I love with all my heart is the scene where Billy Zane flies away and you're left with Pete, and we get to see kind of sweeter Audrey. Can you talk about kind of making Audrey sweeter in the second season?
Was she sweeter?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
She started doing charity work. She stopped sticking pencils in coffee cups and causing trouble, chasing away the Norwegians.
Well, I mean, Jack is Jack. And Jack, I think what you saw there was what Sherilyn and Jack had from the first time I met him in the pilot, and I was afraid, and it was all new, and he was just like, come here, They were finding Laura, and there were, fish and percolators, and he just was so loving and comforting and paternal and encouraging, and I think that's what came out, probably, in that scene.
Yeah.
I loved him very much.
When season 2 came to an end, I mean, James and Michael, you can speak to this as well if you want to, but when season 2 came to an end, did you leave knowing that was it, or did you have any idea that it would possibly continue?
I didn't think it was going to continue. I thought that it had went in a different direction, and that at that point maybe people wanted to go in different directions. Sometimes the grass is always greener, but it ain't. Yeah, I didn't think. I thought it had run its course at that point. Unfortunately, sadly.
Yeah.
question?
Whether you thought anything would continue after season 2?
It felt like it ended too abruptly and weird, but it, like what Sherilyn just said, the grass is always greener, meaning that like other people were on to other things, you know. And the way it ended, though, like, you know, the way this sort of ended, it did end with her saying, "I'll see you in 25 years," with a very, what I felt like a pronged ending, like, you know, with all these different things coming out of it, you know. And it was like, and that wasn't ending; it's like a firework going off and stopping.
Yeah.
And then it just ended, it just stopped. So I didn't think either way whether it could come back or not, and certainly in Hollywood you could bring anything and do things, but I didn't consciously think, oh, this is going to come back, you know what I mean?
Yeah, true. Sabrina, we had a Q&A, just the two of us yesterday, but a lot of the folks here won't have been there, they'll just be here for today.
Sorry you missed it.
So, you'd worked with David, for those who don't know, Sabrina's worked with David since season 2 of Twin Peaks. Could you talk about how the conversation arose about going back to Twin Peaks, about making the return?
Well, I know that Mark contacted David and they decided to start writing again. I think maybe influenced in some way. We were working on the deleted scenes. So it was towards the end of that, so maybe it was just a conversation of doing those things. And then they had been writing a little bit, and they were very private. They weren't saying what they were writing about, but of course, you know, David and Mark are writing. What do you think they're writing about? So finally, David did tell me that they were writing about Twin Peaks, but it was very secret. And, you know, what did I think? And I was very excited.
How did you feel when you found out that this was what it was going to be?
I think, well, just when I heard that Mark and David were writing, that's when I felt I knew.
Right.
And I was, like, stunned. Stunned. Never, ever, ever thought Twin Peaks would come back, honestly.
Story the way I found out was that I went to a chiropractic office and I looked down to write my name and it said Mark Frost. And I'm like, Mark Frost, can there be that many? No, it can't be. And then so he comes out and we're like, oh, you know, and hugs and kisses and miss you and all that. And then he leaves. And then my doctor comes and is like, oh my gosh, I'm not supposed to, he's writing with David. And I was just like, oh my God. He's like, don't tell anybody. And I was just like, and it was probably like a year or two before. And then I thought, but they can't, it's going away. But it's pretty crazy.
Jake's already told us, you told us that you didn't grow up with Twin Peaks, but Amy and Sean, did you, what were your experiences? Did you watch the show when it was on? Did you grow up with it? Was it something that you were aware of as you were growing up?
Thank you. Yeah, I was very aware of it. I loved Lynch's movies, but I did not watch Twin Peaks other than the series finale in college on mushrooms.
Okay, yeah, that'll do it to you.
I only saw it for the first time about 10 years ago. I just dropped on a movie with a dear friend of mine, and he told me to watch it. He said, you know, Amy, I think this is totally your sense of humor. You're going to love it. So we just binge watched it, and we couldn't get it. We couldn't get Fire Walk With Me in Ireland, and we were like, we just couldn't believe it ended after 2 seasons. We're like, oh, where's the rest of it? Where is it? We were like looking for ages. Couldn't find it, but I loved it, absolutely. I only watched Fire Walk With Me just before this series, actually, which I'm glad I did.
Yes.
Phil Jeffries made no sense to me. I was.
Jake, can you remember what David and or Mark, whoever you had the first conversations with, I'm guessing David, do you remember what they told you about your character? Did they kind of sit you down and say, you're going to be playing a kid who smashes demons with a green gardening glove? What was the deal?
It was all David, just Skyping with David. So he told me I was going to be in it in one Skype call, and then another Skype call, however many weeks or months later, he gave me more details about my character. And he was literally like, so you're going to be playing a guy called Freddie, he's a cockney, and he has a magic green glove with super strength. And I think my first reaction was like, cool.
It is pretty cool. And Amy, I mean, kind of same question for you. How much were you told about your character? And also, Candy seems like a character who develops a lot from being kind of initially very much in the background. She kind of develops a character as the season goes on. So how much did you know about the character and how much did you know about her journey?
I just had to burst my way in, really. He just kept on finding me more.
Right.
Yeah, it was. I remember I had no clue what the part was when I booked it, and then they send around your pages, and I was like, oh, it's tiny. It was disappointing. And when I met him for our one-on-one, when he talks to you about who you're playing, I remember just getting. He mentioned 2 of her qualities, like 2, in a very short sentences, and that's all we had to go on. And then I turned up, and when I saw the skeleton of my costume, I screamed, because I met Nancy Steiner, the costume designer, and I walked in, and it was just this really big rail, like really tall rail with these tiny little tutus. I was like, what is this? And then when they started, God, she must have been so annoyed with me, because every time I turned up, we'd add another piece, like the bustier, and then like a skirt, and then like, oh, will we put in a feather? Will we put in gloves? So every week we were trying, we had a few costumes. And then once we got in hair, I think Candy just kind of came out of that. And then, you know, he would make up some scenes, I would come in and I'd be whispered in my ear what I was to say, and, you know, so it was awesome. She just kind of kept fighting her way into more scenes.
How involved were you in that process? I mean, was it a conversation between you and David, or was it David just saying, I've decided to do this?
Oh, it's David decided to do it. It's like, I mean, hey Lynch, do this for me. Kings and queens on that set. But it was brilliant. Like, I remember my first few days working with him. Every time he'd give me direction, I'd just go, and it was so embarrassing. And then I would just walk off. I was too shy. I could never talk to him. I'd just make the ugliest laugh face. Which is probably where he came up with the ugliest cry face.
Turning to you, something that Sabrina was talking about yesterday in the Q&A was that David is a director who pays as much attention to little scenes, small moments, the pieces of everything as he does to the kind of big moments. That obviously fits for your scene. Can you talk about...
What? I thought you guys were here for me. Yes, I mean, that thing was so cool about it, one of the many things that was so cool about this whole experience was getting to actually work with him. Because much like you, when you read your pages, I was like, oh, okay, I'm a Firewatch guy. I know this guy. But, you know, like the first thing when I showed up to set that day, David said, okay, Sean, I think your name is Chris. And I was like, oh, I got a name now. This is really working out. Okay. You know, and then we just sort of went through what you know, we didn't go through the motivation of Chris cleaning the windows, but, you know, we just sort of went through what the scene was, and, I mean, to be honest, what he wanted me to do was pretty straightforward, you know? Find the key, hand it to Jade, clean the windows. And it was super clear, and he was super kind and generous about the whole thing. And yeah, it was really great. That's all I would say.
Debbie, can you talk about some of the kind of specific challenges that were presented by a show like Twin Peaks: The Return? What were some of the most challenging things that you had to work on? Yeah.
Every day was a challenge. I couldn't even start. Every day was a challenge. I think because just of the knowledge that I had to keep in my head of all of the characters and what they do and where they connect, and the responsibility of not telling any of them what their character did or who they interact with, because some of the characters didn't interact with each other, so they didn't know that they were in it. So I had to make sure that everyone in my department who worked, with everyone didn't say anything, or I'd get the evil eye. And,
I am the cop.
Yeah. It was a challenge every day, but a welcome challenge, because as an artist, as I said, you can't really prepare for everything. You can prepare for as much as possible, but when each actor would sit in my chair, we would try to talk about their character, and if it was someone who's established in the previous, series, it was a little easier. But for the new ones, we had to use very specific words. We weren't allowed to say too much. They would come into the trailer, and all the pictures would be taken down, like my reference photos, because I couldn't have one see photos from another. So it was a bit difficult, but yet at the same time it really worked.
Yeah.
And it worked because that's the way David and Sabrina wanted it to.
You're also listed as the prosthetics designer. Does this mean that you worked on the Moth Frog in part 8?
The Frog Moth?
Frog Moth.
Frog Moth was all David
Right.
and Phil, I think. Was it all David?
No, it was a combination of Boof
Okay.
and David.
Okay.
Boof and David.
So that...
Oh, and maybe Phil a little.
That doesn't fall under my
Okay.
category, but things like NATO and all of the other accoutrements. The drunk was a good one.
Yeah. Please tell us about that. How did you get it to keep dripping like that?
Yeah, that was good. That is one of David's old assistants. And when I didn't know, seriously, they didn't know what they were doing on a daily basis. I didn't either, truly. And David would whisper things in my ear, or I'd get an email from Sabrina saying, we want this for this character, and here comes the drunk, and I'm getting a few kind of cryptic things, like what he wanted, and I was like, okay, this is going to be good. And I was so excited when I finally, was able to get him on screen and in that jail cell, and Jay just brought it to life. And that's the thing that I love about all these characters, is that they have brought everything to life.
Yeah.
So regardless of what I put on them, they make it happen.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you.
Including Chris.
Sabrina, can you talk a little about going back to Snoqualmie? I mean, how did people in the town react to having Twin Peaks rock up again 25 years later and, start shooting it all over again?
Oh, that's interesting. North Bend, Snoqualmie, they actually have a rivalry between their two areas a little bit. And I think everybody, for the most part, was very excited about us coming back. But there were a few locations that weren't happy. And when we were touring originally, I mentioned yesterday that David and I went very early in, I guess it was December 2014, and we were there over New Year's, so early 2015. We were looking at locations for possibly not just Twin Peaks, but for outside of Twin Peaks, and also new Twin Peaks locations, which there were a few. And we were trying to get them, and a lot of, it was surprising, a lot of those people said, okay. Is this just me? Is this just me?
It's just you.
Okay. that's really it. There were a few people who were not happy and did not want us there. But for the most part, people were very welcoming, and the mayors, the city of Seattle, who, you know, really has nothing to do with these other areas, were very welcoming and really wanted us there and happy for us to be there.
Something that you mentioned quite briefly yesterday, but that I found really interesting, was that you said that David's return to Snoqualmie, perhaps the fact that it had changed so much may have... That's me. May have even... I'm not even breathing. Exactly. Electricity. That his return to the town, seeing the town changed as it was, may have affected the writing of the show. Can you talk about that maybe a little more?
Well, I don't think it affected the writing of the show. What it did do, David was very specific that he wanted the locations to be exactly as they were.
Right.
They were not. You know, 25 years had passed. So we did have to reconstruct certain buildings. And then one in particular, we went to a different location, which was Big Ed's. We had, you know, he got a new gas station 25 years later. He's at a new place. So nothing was really rewritten to accommodate the script, but we had to re-examine locations.
Yeah. Sherilyn, James and Michael, how was it for you returning to Snoqualmie after all this time? You know, were things as you remembered them? Was it strange to step back into that place that you maybe hadn't been for quite a long time?
No, I shot.
I think so.
Toasty.
Oh, I have to go like that. I shot in Los Angeles.
Okay.
Me too. I wish I went to Snoqualmie.
Okay.
Right?
No, it's like nothing had changed. Conspiracy here, man. No, it's like nothing had changed at all. It was like no time had passed. You know, especially the sheriff's station, even though it was now a place where they train people to drive race cars, but the outside and everything, it was like no time had passed at all. It was very comfortable being back in those situations.
Yeah. Was it good? I mean, so many of your scenes are in the woods. Was it nice to kind of be back in the woods?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. You talk about shooting some of those scenes in the
There's a
woods.
lot of magic up there.
Yeah.
There's little people who live in those woods.
So I'd like to go around and talk about some, as we did briefly with the original series, talk about some favourite moments from the return. And Michael, I'll start with you. Sabrina told us that the scenes with Catherine Coulson were recorded kind of on their own separately. Were you part of that, or were your parts matched in later?
It was already recorded. You know, Catherine was a friend of mine, and I didn't want to be sad about it. I wanted to portray her dignity and her bravery for doing that. So, you know, it was just, it was more of an honoring to her than to a passing.
Yeah. Sherilyn, I'd like to talk about the Audrey's dance scene, which is so incredibly striking. I mean, what was it like to shoot that scene, to be kind of dancing alone in such a big crowd of people? How did it feel?
That's a little awkward. But it always felt awkward, even the first time. But it was also a relief for all that she had been through to finally have a place that seemed safe and where she could escape into her own world.
Yeah.
So it was really lovely.
Yeah, it's a beautiful scene. I mean, it ends quite shockingly with the moment with the mirror, which sparked a lot of conversation. Do you have your own ideas as to what was happening with Audrey as to what that final shot meant for her?
Sure, I mean, but they're simply my ideas because,
yeah.
you know, you can't play something without trying to understand some part of it. And what I feel it parallels with, I just think that we are in a world that is so difficult right now, and it just feels like the flame is turned up, and it's just more intense than it's ever been.
Yeah.
And I think that we have a lot of prisons in our own mind, and whether we create them or society or how we grew up, you know, I just think it's a lot of that stuff. So I could completely relate on so many different levels to, you know, I thought the most revealing was who am I? Who am I? You know. Yeah. So yeah.
You didn't shoot any scenes with Richard Beamer. Did you visit him and catch up? Did you make the chance to go and say, "Hey, Daddy, how you doing?"
I did see him. He came to visit on the set, and yeah, it's always good.
Yeah.
But it was just such a funny conversation with David once, and he was telling me, "Well, this is going to happen," and Richard Beamer, your dad. He's my dad. That's it. Yeah.
That's cool. James, you obviously had that wonderful musical scene at the Roadhouse, partially recreated last night. It was beautiful.